Thank you, thank you. Well, welcome to the Emmanuel Centre for this first in our new series of public debates, which the Spectator is going to be hosting over the next year. Now, we're often told that political debate isn't what it used to be. I spent 15 years sitting in the House of Commons press gallery, and I can attest to that personally, and that the art of respectful disagreement died some time ago in a particularly cold Twitter storm. But not at The Spectator. Our new series of debates revels in good arguments, great disagreements, and the art of winning people over, rather than shouting them into submission. So I'm your chair for this evening, or perhaps your throne, given where I'll be sitting, and I'm here to make sure that our participants respect the rules and get held to account, not only by each other, but also by you, the audience, when we come to your questions later in the evening. And let me explain how tonight is going to work and the role that you are going to be playing. So shortly we're going to be welcoming our debaters onto the stage, 2 who will propose the motion and 2 who will speak against. They're each going to speak for up to 8 minutes, then move to a section of open debate where they can quiz each other before taking questions from you, the audience. Now, we're going to take a vote on the motion before they begin and at the end, and we're going to do this using an app. The QR code was on your seat, and it's on the screen now. So we're going to test how this works before we get stuck into the real debate, and we're going to have a bit of fun with a motion designed to get you into the mood for the rest of the evening. So I can see that some of you are already voting. Do scan the code, if not from the screen, then from the flyers you found on your seat. This will take you to a voting option. Please register your vote for and against this proposal. This House believes that homework should be abolished. As you can see, it is a live vote, so as you vote, the numbers will change until you've all voted, or the events team gets bored and closes the vote, so don't take too long over it. And we are closing with a fascinating result that makes me think that this audience has been packed with teachers. Well, thank you for that. Now that we know that that's working and you understand how it's going to work, we're ready to get underway with the main event. To recap, each speaker is going to have 8 minutes to make their case. Then when all the debaters have delivered their speeches, we will move to a session of open debate, which I will moderate before, if time allows, coming out to you, the audience, for your questions. And finally, each team is going to sum up in closing speeches, and then we will move to the final vote. I will declare the winning team based on which has managed to change the vote the most. So first, let's welcome our debaters to the stage. Here to propose the motion, this House believes that Britain would be better without private schools. Please welcome to the stage Stella Tsantekidou and David Aaronovitch. Now, David is a veteran political columnist who has worked across Britain's top broadcasters and newspapers, a former president of the National Union of Students and champion debater. He now presents The Briefing Room on BBC Radio 4. Stella is a broadcaster and campaigner who has worked for Labour Party frontbenchers, including Emily Thornberry, and she sits on the national executive of the Young Fabians. So welcome to our speakers. And to convince us that those two are both wrong and we are all better off with private schools, please put your hands together for David Starkey and Toby Young. David Starkey is a distinguished historian whose career has spanned the heights of British academia, hugely successful TV documentaries, and now his own YouTube channel, David Starkey Talks. As well as being one of my colleagues at The Spectator, Lord Toby Young is a long-time campaigner for educational diversity having founded the West London Free School, and he's also General Secretary of the Free Speech Union. Now, while our guests get themselves settled, let's take the opening vote. So on the display, the QR code should be appearing. Here it is. This House believes that Britain would be better off without private schools. So as the debate begins, let's find out what you think about them having just arrived. We've got 2 minutes for this. Okay, so I think that's probably quite a clear result there. Thank you everyone for voting. Well, just let the speakers digest the challenge they have ahead of them. And now to the important business of the evening. So first up to speak for the motion, David Aaronovitch. Now David can speak for up to 8 minutes. After 7, I will ring this bell and give him 60 seconds notice. At 8 minutes, I will ring the bell twice, and he will have to conclude his sentence. So, David.
Thank you very much. And it's great to be here in front of the North Korean Parliament, giving the speech. I'm very honoured to be here at a Spectator event, especially since the editor of the Spectator is a man I've known and liked for many years, well before he grew a reputation as a reforming Secretary of State for Education, and his former wife's recent memoir didn't make me admire his energy and endurance any the less. Hasn't taken away from him at all. Now, one iteration of this Spectator debate, this is the motion we've got at the moment, was the proposition that we should leave private schools alone. And I was more than willing to go along with this on the proviso that private schools left the rest of us alone, but they never do. In 2017, a former education secretary complained that private school educated people were massively overrepresented in the highest ranks of politics, business, the media and sport. In some Olympian sports, it's practically 100% private school alumni, sports such as sailing, equestrianism and so on. The state schools do get a very big look in sports like badminton and judo because you don't need a lake or a boathouse or stables for judo. You only need the equipment, the thing that you stand up in. Now, in 2023, average private school fees were £15,200, whereas state spending per pupil was £8,000, a 90% difference. And that gap had more than doubled since 2010. Now, you might ask why. There's been a 75% increase in real terms in private school fees between 2000 and 2024. 75% increase in real terms. When the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, examined why, they said, this is funny because there are 9 pupils for every teacher in the private sector, which compares with about 18 for every pupil in the state sector, but the pupil-teacher ratio is around the same level as in 2010. So where had all this extra fee gone on? And it said it's therefore likely that higher private school fees have been spent on other resources, for example, other staff, facilities, staff pay level, extra costs, and so on. In September, this last September, the Telegraph's money reporter did a report in which he said many schools have effectively taken part in an arms race, spending tens of millions of pounds to build state-of-the-art infrastructure, often to attract overseas families. Brighton College spent £55 million on a new sports and science centre that opened in 2020. It features 18 laboratories, a cinema, and a rooftop running track. Eton College spent £21.5 million on an aquatic centre in 2020. Dulwich College has also spent £21 million in the past decade to build a science block. And this was the Telegraph reporter talking. And yet, private schools never stop moaning and never stop lobbying. So in 2019, the Sutton Trust published a paper which showed that 8 private schools sent 1,310 pupils to Oxbridge over 3 years. 1,310, 8 private schools. While over the same period, 2,894 other schools sent just 1,220 students between them. Now, what happened in that year when there was an attempt by the government, the Conservative government, and by the universities themselves to try and even this out even a little? A Mail story ran like this: privately educated children are being edged out of places at Oxford and Cambridge by social engineering, was the headline. They went on to explain that Anthony Wallersteiner, head of the £12,000 a term Stowe School in Buckinghamshire, said the plans to improve opportunities for underrepresented groups caused a fall in Oxbridge places for private school pupils. And he said, these children's parents are arguing it is social engineering and positive discrimination. As it happens, Stowe's fees have gone up 30% in the 6 years since he made that complaint. They spent £6 million in 2023 to build a design, technology and engineering building. The conventional figure is that private schools educate 7% of pupils in this country. In fact, it's nearer 6.5% once you exempt overseas pupils. As of 2024, after all this social engineering that was being complained about, the proportion of private school entrants to Oxford was nearly 34%, and Cambridge was 29%. That's one level of complaint. We're being discriminated against. Our poor kids are not getting into Oxbridge when they should, and all these other people from state schools are getting there who don't deserve it. This last year, we've seen the business of the VAT imposed by the government. Now, when it was just a proposition in May last year before the election, headlines ran like things like Labour's VAT plans blamed for fall in private school entries. They were blamed, of course, by the independent schools, that's where the figures came from, who had, just as it happens, just before the VAT, increased fees themselves by an average of 5.5%, which was not the rate of inflation, was considerably above. 19th of May in the Times, quarter of parents would quit private schools if VAT added to fees. And this was from a survey of people with investable assets of more than £250,000. 24th of May in the Times, grandparents empty savings to pay private school fees. Families are trying to find ways to prepay fees in anticipation of Labour adding VAT. Same day, they run a story from somebody, I'll send my son to India. Parents plan to beat VAT on private schools. One parent certainly did leave, former Sunday Times journalist Isabel Oakeshott, she of the Reform Party, educated at Gornston, and whose current partner is the multi-millionaire Reform Party MP Richard Tice, after having bemoaned the influence of Islam in the UK, one of her big things, took her children to be educated in Dubai to avoid VAT on school fees. And for those who don't know, the official religion of the Emirates is not Buddhism. For the last year, independent school pupil numbers fell by about 11,000, in fact, 1.9% year on year. Overall, pupil numbers across all schools fell by 0.7% over the same period. In other words, the great exodus never happened, as it was never going to. It was all privilege-protecting nonsense, as it always is. In 2023, average private school fees were £15,200, whereas state spending per pupil was £8,000, as I said, and that gap had more than doubled. Sorry? I couldn't hear you. Blimey, that might take long. Okay. So I just want to take you to what was said by a very famous Secretary of State for Education, charging very high fees and giving fee remissions which mostly benefit those who could be considered to be already wealthy can certainly be justified as lawfully charitable. Actually, this was an education charity and as delivering public benefit. But since schools are for the most part elite organisations delivering a paid-for and exclusive product, the extent to which this meets public perceptions of charity is questionable. You can absolutely say that again, which is what led this Education Secretary to say egregious state support to the already wealthy so that they might buy advantage for their own children was immoral. And she added, for every lucky scholarship boy or girl helicoptered out of poverty, for every Oliver Twist who graduates from the streets to Egyptian cotton streets, how many others are left behind like the rest of Fagin's gang? And this Education Secretary called for the ending of charitable status for private schools, saying that it was a stain on the country. Toby, who was that Education Secretary?
My boss.
It was Michael Gove.
Thank you, David. Well, we now turn to David Starkey to speak against the motion. David, you have 8 minutes.
Madam Chairman, can I remind the proposer of the motion of its actual wording, which was, this House believes that Britain would be better off without private schools. That is qualitative. He has given us a quantitative sort of analysis which tempts me to the phrase of lies, damn lies, and statistics. He's also, of course, failed completely to register the would-be, the future conditional. Can I say I'm astonished at this opening? Because there was, in fact, a moment. He's talking as though this vision, this nirvana of a world without public schools is something to be in the future. It was, at a very important level, achieved on that day, that blissful day, when dawn it was to be alive and to be Andrew Marr was very heaven, when New Labour, renewed or whatever it is, Labour, was elected last July, because, as the Sutton Trust, which you've already mentioned, of course pointed out, that there was in fact 23 out of 24 cabinet ministers were educated as you choose in the state sector. Ladies and gentlemen, why was this not adduced? Why was not the Starmer cabinet held before us as the vision of the quality, the subtlety, the perfection, the honesty of the public sector, as opposed to this miserably over-subsidized field at which the proposer of the motion has got himself lost in? Because can we be quite clear? Let's just read, actually, what the chap from the Sutton Trust actually said. It really is worth listening to very carefully. This cabinet is the most diverse, because they all went to state school, in terms of educational background ever recorded. It represents real progress towards smashing the class ceiling in politics, and it's the closest to genuinely reflect the proportion of Brits who went to comprehensive schools. This bizarre misuse of the word diversity, because they were all the same. Shall we listen? This really does seem to me, for a champion debater, a rather strange use of language. Shall we now listen to somebody who led the 19th century debate on education, which is John Stuart Mill on liberty. This is the greatest of texts on the subject of liberty, published in 1869, immediately after the Great Reform, the Second Great Reform Act, which gives the vote to my ancestors, the skilled working man, because my father was a toolmaker too. Anyway, all that has been said about the importance of individuality of character and diversity in opinions and mode of conduct, diversity, real diversity, not the mock diversity of race, but the real diversity of intelligence, of aptitude, of skill, of thought, involves, as of the same unspeakable importance, diversity of education. A general state, this is Mill, a general state education is a mere contrivance for moulding people to be exactly like one another. And as the mould in which it is cast is that which pleases the predominant power in government, whether it be monarch, priesthood, aristocracy, or the majority of this generation, in proportion as it is efficient and successful, it establishes a despotism over the mind, leading to a natural tendency to a despotism over the body. That's what he wants. That's what the Labour Party want. And this idea of a despotism established through state education is the more poisonous when we have, of course, a virtually complete takeover of the state's teaching sector by a peculiar and increasingly distrusted set, and I'm going to use the proper word, of lies. Some people call them noble lies, but they are lies, which the population is beginning to rebel against. But can we actually put all this into its proper context? What I think, though it was very difficult to tell from the screed of statistics, what my opponent is wanting is abolition. He is wanting to destroy that which is good to make things better. That is a proposition as logical and as illogical as anybody can think of. But the reason why the Starmer government is such a disaster is not simply they're a product of a wretched and disnatured system of education. It is because New Labour, the kind of people that those on the other side of the House support and act as the intellectual proponents of, decided to do to the whole British state what they want to do to our education, which is to smash, destroy, and uproot. Ladies and gentlemen, if you smash, destroy, and uproot, and then salt the ground, there is no surprise when nothing grows. We in Britain are now experiencing the non-growth of radical change. Why visit it on education? Because again, let's just look a little harder. Those schools that have been denounced, those schools which may indeed, and I would be one here to pull back. I belong to a generation when the divisions between state education and private education were very much less extreme than they are now. And indeed, in the era of the grammar school, and remember, the great 1944 Education Act of Rab Butler did exactly what Stuart Mill had wanted. It built on the extraordinary range of different kinds of schools. Some were historically endowed, some were religious schools, an extraordinary variety. Jewish, Quaker, my family is a Quaker family. Again, schools of very, very varied aptitudes and whatever, and it created potentially a remarkable structure. We all know, of course, there was a profound defect in that technical education, which again is a historic defect in Britain, wasn't taken as seriously as it should have been. But nevertheless, it provided opportunities to people like me. It created schools. Again, this denunciation of the private schools for their facilities. My little school, a school of 300, it had a proper gym, it had a proper swimming pool, it gave me the practice in debating, in acting, there was excellent music, there was art, there was the entire range, and you destroyed it because you decided it was too good. There were people, weren't there, like that leading Labour politician who said, because swearing was fashionable even then, I want to destroy every fucking grammar school. Once again, that Anthony Crossman, once again, that determination to destroy. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard a gale of statistics without a serious argument, apart from relentless equality, dragging down the best in order possibly to drag up the worst. But we know it doesn't work like that. You demolish the good and everything else goes worse. Those are the fruits of that kind of language. We've seen them. We have a government that's founded on those principles. How could you possibly wish to generalize them?
Thank you.
We hope that you're enjoying the start of the Great British Schools debate, but if you want to continue watching, you will have to be a Spectator subscriber. If you're still not signed up, fear not, you can subscribe in seconds and get 3 months for just £3. Head to spectator.co.uk/live and don't miss another moment. That's it for the live stream of the Great British Schools Debate here on YouTube. But we're in full flow over at spectator.co.uk/live, where you can continue watching as a Spectator magazine subscriber for just £3 for 3 months. Your Spectator subscription includes full access to our website and app, along with a whole host of other benefits, like our subscribers' newsletters, and, of course, these live stream broadcasts. So head over to spectator.co.uk/live to watch the rest of the Great British Schools Debate.